What God cannot do does not exist is biblically correct. What God cannot do does not exist. That assertion is biblically correct. And we're going to see why it is biblically correct. In other words, what you have Abel Damina doing, trying to deflect the truth of the assertion that has been popularized by Pastor Jerry Eze, that what God cannot exist isn't biblical, it's a lie. And we're going to see proof from the Bible, very, very simple proof from the Bible, proofs that are simple as something that is expected of even a 10-year-old to grasp. So why is it so difficult for the likes of Abel Damina, who I would like to describe as a junkie that is hooked on trying to be relevant by all means necessary? All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is BC Simeon Betty Grade. Like my page, BC Simeon Betty Grade. I'm also on social media with the name BC Simeon Television Network. Help me share this message. I guarantee you won't regret doing so. Now, within the context of the Bible, what God cannot do does not exist as an assertion is the same as saying, with God, nothing shall be impossible, or with God, all things are possible. In a simple term, it has a generic undertone within a context. Yes, it has a generic undertone. When you say what God cannot do does not exist, you're giving a generic undertone. It seems like you're generalizing. Yes, that's what it looks like. However, within the biblical context, where I believe it was inspired, there is a context that undergirds that assertion. We're going to look at it very briefly. We're going to look at two instances. What God does not exist, what God cannot do does not exist, is the same as equally saying, with God nothing shall be impossible. Now let's go to the Bible, just two scriptures. All right, the first one is Luke chapter 1 verse 37. All right, let's look at the context that actually led to Jesus, to the angel telling Mary. That's the first place we'll find the assertion, with God nothing shall be impossible. When we talk about context, when we talk about context, we're looking at the environment around which what was said was said. We're looking at political context or cultural context. All right. In this case, the angel was replying Mary when Mary asked the question and saying, how can I conceive a child without having an intercourse with a man? And the angel replied, for with God nothing shall be impossible. That within that context, we are saying, within what God is expected to do, what God cannot do does not exist. It's very simple. Why is the like of Abel Damina insistent on creating confusion with it? I will tell you why Abel Damina does what he does. Like I've often told a lot of people who care to listen, Abel Damina may have started off with a genuine intention to effect reformation, but he's so hooked on the desire to be relevant, like a drug addict hooks on drug. He doesn't actually know how to remain relevant anymore. So he distorts scriptures. And the way he goes about it is so crazy that if you dare look within the context of the scripture, you will notice that this guy has actually surrendered his soul for the devil to hijack him. When you say what God cannot do does not exist, you're simply saying within the parameters of what God is expected to do, what God cannot do does not exist. It's as simple as that. Just like the context we see in Luke 1:37, Mary said, how can I have a child? How can I get pregnant? I don't have a man. And the angel said, with God, nothing shall be impossible. So he wasn't talking about criminality, okay? Because if we extend it beyond the context of what God is expected to do, then it becomes an error. But in this case, what God cannot do does not exist, which is the same as with God, nothing shall be impossible. We're simply saying within the parameters of what God is expected to do, what God cannot do does not exist. If you also look at Matthew 19, okay, if you look at Matthew 19:26, the same thing Jesus said that with God nothing shall be impossible. In response to the disciples' question, who can be saved? And Jesus responded. The conversation started when he said, it is easier for a camel to walk through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get into the kingdom. And the disciples said, well, so many people are bound to be rich, so who then can be saved? And Jesus replied and said, with God, nothing shall be impossible, which has a generic undertone. But he's saying that within the context of who can be saved. It's not extending it to criminality. So when you hear people or you hear Pastor Jerry Eze say what God cannot do does not exist, yes, it has a generic undertone within the context of what God is expected to do. When you understand this, you will not allow yourself to be misled by the likes of Abel Damina. Like I said, this guy called Abel Damina, he may have a genuine intention, but then he's lost ground as far as being relevance is concerned. And so he looks for everything to attack. It's like a junkie who is hooked on drugs. He's trying by every means to remain relevant. That's what he's doing. If not, you don't require esoteric intelligence to know that what God cannot do does not exist, which is similar to with God nothing shall be impossible. It's referring to what we expect God to do. We don't expect God to cause evil or to do what is outside the confines of his character, of justice, of righteousness. We are talking about what we expect God to do. All right? Abel Damina leverages on sensationalism. And of course, social media can help you, can use sensationalism to gain followership on social media. And that's what he's doing. It's not as if some of his argument has any substance. Most of his arguments lacks substance within biblical context. Intellectually speaking, even logically speaking, most of Abel Damina's interpretation to biblical matters lacks substance. Like I said, he's trying to regain relevance by unrighteous means of propagating errors and all of that. That's what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, what God cannot do does not exist within the context of what God is expected to do. What God cannot do does not exist. That assertion is biblically correct as far as the context of what God is expected to do is concerned. Thank you very much. This is BC Simeon Betty Great. Help me share this as far and as wide as you can, and follow my page for more inspiring content. May God bless you. Very good.